Thank you all very much for your patience. I'm Zola, by the way, in case you forgot who I am, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today. We're going to be having some lovely conversations. I invite you guys to engage with us if you have any specific question that you just need answered. Just put your hand up or try to give me the look, and I will pick it up. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we have panelists, when I say your name, you could just put your hand up to signal so we know what's popping up. Evie Smith. So Evie is a storyteller with over 20 years of experience as a director, performer, creator, and producer in the worlds of theater, print, film, television, and voiceover. He is comfortable working in any medium of performance. As a Hi friends at the back over there. I know we're having some really lovely conversations back there, and I'm sure that they're super great back there. I know that we're having some really great conversations, but I promise you, if you just bear with us, we're going to be having some even lovelier conversations up here on the panel. Speaker, he's at home in front of audiences of all sizes. Beyond the curtain, he has told stories as a sound designer, scene shop foreman, stagehand, carpenter, and welder. The goal, regardless of the role in the telling of the story, is to empower as many voices as possible. As an artist, particularly an artist of color, he recognizes the power of experiencing one's own history and worldview manifest on stage, as well as furthering connections to the stories of others. It is his mission, therefore, to facilitate the cultivation and cooperation of artists from every cross-section of our society and across artistic styles and traditions. Evie studied acting at Ohio University and is a graduate of the Birmingham Conservatory for Classical Theater at the Stratford Festival. Julie Young. Julie Young brings a remarkable and compelling array of professional and personal experiences to her calling as Professor of Leadership and Community Development at Brescia University College at Western University. Her work as a successful banker, entrepreneur, consultant, and philanthropist brought her to the pursuit of a doctorate and a career educating and inspiring young women to be all they can be. Her current research focuses on the empowerment of women and girls, the financial inclusion of the poor, and micro-enterprise development in the global north. Fawzia Agbonin. Fawzia is a 17-year-old Nigerian-Canadian slam poet and author of 2 books, The Girl Who Feared Men and I Never Truly Hated You. Both are in the process of publishing. She's a performance artist and national competitor. Fawzia will be representing London in the National Festival of Spoken Word Poetry, taking place in Vancouver this April. She has performed slam poetry for several organizations, such as the Thames Valley District School Board's Diversity Conference, the Black Students Association at Western University, and the closing gala at the Wolf Performance Hall, as well as for the Kids in Care at the Children's Aid Society, just to name a few. She was also nominated by the London Police for the Black History Month Trailblazer Award and participated in the London Police Academy. Fawzia's poetry is about diversity, racism, mental health, anxiety, and many other social justice issues that face our society today. Our fourth panelist, Elijah Goy. Elijah is originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was born in Zambia and immigrated to Canada in 2012. Elijah is a senior undergraduate student at Western University, studying international relations and global development studies in the Faculty of Social Sciences. He is also an undergraduate researcher at Western University's Network for Economic and Social Trends, and a Propel Fellow, currently working on a digital payments and logistics app through Weston Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Elijah has authored a workbook on financial literacy in partnership with Junior Achievement and the Peel District School Board. In his most recent experience, he worked as a community development and logistics intern at Ottawa's Social Housing Registry, where he was responsible for engaging community stakeholders, improving citizen engagement, and addressing the role of gang violence and policing policies in government housing. Elijah aspires to continue working towards a career in sustainable development and diplomacy. I also just want to touch on the point that the Black experience is not one color. It's not just one stroke. It's very much diverse, and it's a mosaic of multiple different experiences. So though you are or will be hearing from individuals from the Black community who have different experiences, just keep in mind that these are not the only experiences that exist. And yeah, just a thought. So what, in your opinion, are the characteristics of a strong and healthy Black family?
I would say a supporting family, like a family of any gender, whether it be two females, two males, female and a male, but parents that are supporting their children mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Parents and children that have the same values and beliefs. Parents of minorities, I'd say specifically, that are able to take racially charged acts that we see in the media like daily and are able to turn them into a teaching moment for the kids instead of kind of dismissing it and letting these children see these acts of hatred and internalize them. Speaking about things like that, speaking about racial topics with your children, that's so important.
And yeah, and just to touch upon what she was saying about support, I think it's also important to, for families, not just Black families, but to foster an understanding of the communities that they grew up in. I think that's extremely important, that we understand the diversity that's in our community, that we understand what's happening in our communities, and that's the only way that I really believe that we can go forward, is if we understand, what's happening. And I feel like families, that should be an integral part of, all families should just be fostering that understanding and fostering that, that history.
And just to go back to Fazia's point about families who kind of promote or encourage this climate where if you are faced with any sort of racial, or if you're faced with racism, let's be real, when you're faced with racism, you are able to go to your family and they will validate that experience. How do you think, and this is to the panel, how do you think families can raise their children or to create that type of environment?
I think to build upon what our bright and talented young people have shared with us, it's so important to foster resilience in our young people. And I think one of the core components in developing resilience is to start with what is right. We must start with the strengths and the assets that we come to the table with in our individual families, but also in our communities, because so often rather, we are so focused on the hardship and the oppression that we face, and it is important to address, but we also need to turn our attention and our eyes to what is right. So I want to look at my young children, I have children, and start with what are the unique talents and gifts and capabilities that are special and unique to you, and as a parent, how can I build upon that? And then the other component, in addition to resilience, I would say, is families are like systems. So not every member of the family is going to be the right arm, right? And so you have different talents and gifts, and when each of us is able to realize our full potential, then you have a fully functioning system. You have a left arm and a right arm and a mind and so on and so forth, and we're not devaluing the worth of any one member or privileging one family member because of gender or age or what have you. So I think resilience, by starting with what is right, having a strength-based approach, and also remembering we're all working together. And in order for one person to be okay, we all need to be okay. It's a system.
A number of years ago, I asked my father a question, and I said to him, I was having some challenges in a relationship once, and I said, how do you know that mom loves you? And he looked at me and he said, because she accepts me, unquestionably. And that changed my world, because it made me realize that love isn't just sort of a thing that families have to do for each other. It means that it's a very active exercise from every member of a family to say, you know what, whatever you are, whoever you are, that's cool. We're going to work through this from whatever perspective you come from. And I don't have to have all the answers for you. I don't have to be able to tell you what to do, but I have to stand at your side and give you support while you figure it out. And I think sometimes we shy away from conversations in a family because something's scary or because something goes against the belief structures that we grew up with, or something's challenging to us personally or morally or physically. But it ain't about us, it's about the person that's having the trouble, right? So if a family member comes to you and says, what do I do about this? You say, well, let's figure it out. This is your decision, and I'm going to support you in whatever decision you make. I think that's one characteristic of strong families that I've seen across any racial spectrum, any kind of religious spectrum, anything else, right? Families who have people in their family who may not agree with them necessarily, but who support them unquestionably, tend to thrive.
That's it. Yeah, I definitely completely agree to fostering that system of acceptance is really important towards building healthy and strong Black families. And obviously these families are made out of individual identities, and I'm just wondering, what are your cultural or racial identity, and how does it change through different environments? How does it change when you're at home versus when you're with your distant family, or even when you're at work or you're at school?
My identity never changes. I am who I am. The way the world reacts to me is what changes. If I'm in a room full of people who look nothing like me, they're going to react to me a certain way. If I'm in a room full of people who share the experience of being a racialized other of some form or fashion, they're going to react to me a certain way. They're going to have an empathy for my experience that isn't conjured or created or invented. So I think in some ways I'm not sure what that means. I know that in certain circumstances I find it easier to survive if I switch my code, as it were. A good example is looking at our last president in the United States of America. I'm American originally. Don't look at the current one. But our last president was very adept at walking into a situation and adjusting the way he addressed those people, depending on what they needed to hear and how his speech, how his behavior would make them comfortable, because it allows people to listen to you. And I think that's a very important skill that people learn when they have to move between different landscapes. So in that respect, I guess I do change, but I am who I am.
Yeah. So I think for me specifically, I think my situation has been really, really unique. So coming from Congo, both my parents were genocide survivors. If you guys know about the 1994 Rwandan genocide, so a lot of Congolese people ended up in Zambia. So being in Zambia and being raised and born in Zambia, I was never fully considered Zambian. So, and then coming to Canada in 2012, adapting and, taking on that Canadian name and that Canadian title was really, really hard, and it's something that I still struggle with. And I think a lot of immigrants can, attest, to not feeling Canadian enough. So I think for me, like, it's been this constant wave of like having to learn, you know, what my identity is and having to like learn how to adapt. And even when we came to Canada, I didn't really speak English. So having to learn English and having to be... Hello? It's on. Okay. So having to come to Canada and having to learn English and then not wanting to sound too immigrant and not wanting to sound like I didn't know anything, and then being in spaces like school where all the kids were speaking English and then I didn't really speak great English, so I had to kind of, you know, adapt to that. And like, I feel like a lot of immigrants, like, that's a story that we always miss, is the story of like, you know, how a lot of people have to adapt, and a lot of people, you know, identity is constantly changing, and you're constantly having to, you know, deal with situations that call for you to, you know, switch between these differences. And so that's been my experience, you know, since I got here as a South Florida.
My background, my father is black from Trinidad, and my mother is white. She's Irish Canadian. So growing up biracial, we have a different word to describe it when I was a kid. I won't say it because it's politically incorrect today. I think that really shaped who I have become as an adult, despite the fact that, of course, identity politics have shifted through the decades. So in our childhood, our family home, my father was very active in the civil rights movement in the U.S. He studied in the U.S. He left his home country and went to Howard. So we grew up on stories of Martin Luther King and marching and boycotting, and we were told as children that because we had one drop of black blood, that we ought not to delude ourselves into believing the lie that we would be more privileged, and that we needed to be twice as good, that our grades needed to be perfect, that in order to compete in the labor market, we would need to be excellent, and that really the options were doctor or lawyer. At least that's how it went in our home. So fast forward to today, and of course, as I mentioned, identity politics have shifted, and I'm able to explore and understand my identity in a different way today. It would be also important for me to say that in a multiracial family that my own nuclear family now, I'm of a different race than my husband. My husband is white, my children are black, my children cannot pass. So we have various shades in our family. My daughters choose to wear braids in their hair. They have wider noses and bigger lips. And I say this because they say it to me, "Mommy, you don't understand." Because people don't know what you are, but people know what we are. And living in London and living in North London, my children are experiencing a measure of class privilege in their lives, of access to education and horses and competitive sports and various things. And so we're the only ones, often. They're the only ones, they're the only kids in the school, they're the only ones at the club. And so life becomes quite a bit about managing what you're able to show to others. We don't want to be too this, we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. So, although race is very much a social construction, it is very real in its consequences. Even when we don't talk about it as part of the sort of political conversation we're permitted to have. If I'm going golfing, I'm not going to really talk about my political views, because I might not be invited to return. If I'm teaching a class, and it isn't a class that's focused on colonialism, I may not self-identify. Because we know the literature suggests that if you do self-identify, it affects your teaching evaluations. So, I spend my life reading the findings on studies, and race and racism are very alive and real in their consequences, even in 2019, unfortunately. But again, as I say to my students, and when I say these kinds of things, I also want to say we always have to return to a place of hope. We always want to return to a place of what's right, but we don't want to turn a blind eye to what's real. So I got off track there for a moment there.
For me specifically, because I'm a high school student, my experiences don't really go past high school too much, but I can say that if I were to answer this question, I would say that I didn't change my own cultural identity, but that I noticed that it was changed for me. So I'm from Mississauga. I just got to London last year. And in Mississauga, people think that it's a lot more diverse than it is here. In my school, I'm the second black girl in my entire grade. And being in a school like that doesn't have representation for black people, you notice certain things. You notice that loudness is perceived as ghetto-ness, as ratchetness. You notice that a name like my name, Fazia, which is you think easy enough to pronounce, is not. And so people in my school would change my name without asking me. They would call me Faz or they would call me Zia. And I never gave the permission to change my name. They never asked me for it. They never said, oh, your name's a little bit hard to pronounce. Can I just call you Faz or can I just call you Zia? No, they just changed it. So being in a place like that, not actually wanting to actually change my cultural identity, but noticing that I was quieting myself a little bit more, silencing myself, not speaking out. Whenever I saw injustice happening, whenever I heard people saying slavery jokes, which would happen in my school, I wouldn't speak out, So I would say that in my own personal experience, I didn't change my cultural identity. I don't change it when I'm in school, but I find that it's changed for me.
Thank you all for sharing your experiences, and I'm going to take it one step further by asking how, because I can't imagine it was easy to go through or to have went through those situations, but how have those been mitigated, or what tangible skills have you developed or learned to overcome that, or to, I don't know, can't be overcome, but maneuver that?
I think there's some things that you sort of unconsciously learn in order to survive in shifting stances like that, and I think there are some things that you consciously do. Like you say, as you grow up, you learn that you need to be better at certain things. You need to excel in ways that you notice, for example, your white counterparts don't have to. I'm a classical actor. I was trained to do classical theater. I do a lot of Shakespeare. And so I'm often, again, one of the only black people in the room, if not the only black person in the room. And I find that over the course of my career, one of the primary pieces of feedback I've gotten, whereas an audience member will come to one of my white colleagues and say, oh wow, that was so moving, it was so just wonderful work. They'll come to me and say, you speak so clearly. And I'll look at them and I say, yes, I'm a native English speaker. It's my first language, and I speak it better than you because I'm trained to. So can we move on and tell me what you think of the work itself? That is a sort of passive aggressive roadblock that you run into, right? It's not about what I was doing on stage. It was about the fact that, oh my God, I can't believe he can do that, right? Of course, it works the other direction too. I was once being considered for a show by August Wilson called King Hedley II. And King is, for lack of a better term, he's a thug, man. He just got out of jail for killing a dude. He's got a giant scar on his face. He lives in the inner city of Pittsburgh. And the director, black director, sat me down. The artistic director wanted me to play it. The director sat me down and said, I just don't think you're street enough. And I looked at her and similarly, I said, I'm an actor. My family comes from the south side of Chicago and the inner city of Kansas City. I know these worlds, right? Just because I do Shakespeare doesn't mean I can't do this too, right? It's all part of me. So I think that the assumptions that people make about us help us to figure out how to behave to navigate those assumptions, and in fact to break them. I think that's one of the great pieces of power that marginalized people of any stripe have, is that they can shatter expectations in ways that are profound for folks. You know, you can change your life just by being who you are, as long as you're very clear about who you are, right? And not playing to type, or not playing into stereotypes that people expect of you. I think it's really important.
Can you hear me? Okay. I would say that one skill that has served me well is being strategic and being thoughtful, pausing, and deciding when it is right to speak up and when it is time to let it go. Because I'm very aware that if I'm quickly identified as too haughty or with a chip on one shoulder, wherever someone would like to situate me, then my ability to influence might be diminished. So my experience has taught me that walking in the right relationship with others, in building trust, in getting to know one another, in just being human beings together, eventually allows you the opportunity to speak into someone's life if you hear something that is very concerning to you, or offensive, or racist. But if you always jump to the correction on day one, like, you just need to be strategic. So that's one thing that I have found that has served me. I'm not saying that we shouldn't call out injustice, but sometimes you want to go for the big win. So I say to my daughters, you know, if something serious happens, don't mess with Mama Bear. So there is a time and place. My one daughter had an experience not too long ago during a class where one of her peers said to her, what is the difference between a park bench and a black man? And so there were 12 kids standing around during class time outside, and she said, I don't know. And everybody was waiting for the answer, and he said, oh, well, a park bench can support a whole family. And North London, so I'm greeting her at the bus after school, and she just runs into me and just bursts into tears. And she is barely able to catch her breath for about half an hour. And I'm trying to understand what's happened, please tell me what's happened. And she told me, that is the time to speak. So of course I got on the phone, talked to the principal, and I will say that after 3 weeks it was still not addressed. And I grew impatient after several calls and went to the school and spoke to the teacher. He was aware of what had happened. But we don't want to make the other students uncomfortable, is what I was told. So we can't address the issue because we don't want the other students to be uncomfortable. So I said, well, what's going to happen is I'm going to politely wait here until you have some time, because I have lots of time. With a nice smile and a nice quiet voice. And I stood at the door and I waited for 45 minutes. And you realized, we're talking about this today.
I'm just wondering, from your perspectives, because we all have very different perspectives here, what is the role of the community? And I'm just going to stop it there. You can interpret it however you'd like, but what is the role of our community? Not our community, the community.
I think it's important that, you know, in our communities we recognize, you know, the strengths in our communities and all the great things happen in our communities, because that really helps to shape how the younger people and the younger kids who are growing up in the community view the future and how they go forward. And just understanding the community itself, like, that's really solid, you know. And I have a little sister who, you know, just growing up black and, like, you know, having to look around the community. When we first came to London, we thought, there's not too many black people in London. Like, which we were coming from Toronto, and it's like, who's black and lives in London? Like, why are we coming here? All my friends clown me for coming to London. But like now, being in this city, and just seeing and recognizing the community that we live in, and seeing all the positives that are happening. I was telling my sister that, she turned 9 years old yesterday. We have, our first female black city councilor, sitting in the room. And like, those stories have to be shared. Those stories have to, be told, and they have to be recognized, and we have to see what's happening in our community. Telling her about that, and telling her that, in a city like this, she too can be successful, and she sees someone that looks just like her, can also be successful, against all odds and against all the hardest circumstances. That's what we need to be seeing, and that's very important for little kids. And just the same way I was inspired, when I watched the 2008 elections, to see Barack Obama get elected, or to see Michelle Obama become our first black governor general, like those are stories that need to be told in our communities, and they need to be heard. And like that's extremely important in how we shape, the younger community that's growing up and how they see themselves. And listen, if success wasn't told to them, they wouldn't see a picture of success that's them. And it's extremely important that they see themselves in their mentors, they see themselves in their city councilors, they see themselves in their political leaders, they see themselves, in the academic space, they see themselves in the policing community, because there's a lot of tension that's happening right now. We see it in the US, especially between blacks and police officers, even here, So it's extremely important that they're seeing their faces represented in those, in those sectors. It's extremely important that they're seeing that, And even myself, I've dealt with that, and I didn't take myself seriously until I started seeing people who look just like me, in the places that I look to, But when I didn't see that, my vision of success was never black, And it's extremely important that we see this, and that we're seeing this. So the role of the community, I think, to summarize what I'm saying here is, tell these stories, tell what's happening in the community, say it, let your younger kids know the history, know what's happening, let them know, these are big stories, and these are stories that they should know and that they should carry on with them, and they'll feed to the next generation that they were able to see success happen, they were able to see somebody that looked just like them, because a couple years ago, not too long ago, that wasn't the case, and people were having to build their own stories and having to, get themselves up there. They were having to create those businesses and to create those enterprises and to get to those tables where they weren't allowed to be before. And so, it's extremely important that these stories are getting out to the community, and that the opportunity for them to be told are there. Because a long time ago, like this, we weren't allowed to be saying all this stuff, and like now we are. So like it's extremely important that we're telling the stories, and that it's happening. Because it's happening every day, right here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to what Elijah said. I think the role of the community is having events like this, because when, like he said, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of black people in London. And that feeling of being kind of an island in a sea full of other colors and other cultures, it might feel isolating to the younger generations. I know I felt isolated when I first came here, but after coming to the opening launch last year, that's when I actually got the confidence to actually speak up, Then that's when I created poems about people, like, addressing the fact that my name was shortened and that's not right. And I used moments like that, moments of injustice, as a teaching moment, And if you don't have these events, if we don't see that there are other people in the city who look just like us, who are going through the exact same things, then we don't have the confidence to speak up. And I just feel like that's really important.
Thank you. And we're about to wrap up. I just have a few more questions. Have any of you guys seen the movie Black Panther? Yeah? How has the movie shaped the conversation about the Black community, or how is it different?
I think I can answer it just the same way I did before. I think it shaped the conversation, but I feel like it's also changed the conversation that we're having before. And now, you know, to see a movie with all Black leads do so successful, you know, like that's a great picture for us to see, and it's showing us that, you know, we need to be respected in our industries, and, you know, we need to have that audience, and we need to be in those positions. And I think Black Panther is, you know, yes, it's just a movie, but it's done a lot, you know, for the vision of Black that kids are seeing today.
Yeah, thank you. And Evie Smith, can I please get your take on this, just because you do have experience in, you know, classical film and all that cool stuff?
Yes, of course. Look, representation matters, and Black Panther was an amazing fountain of representation for our people, right? For everyone. Because it ain't just Black people that look at Black Panther and go, man, that's cool. It's everybody. This is a big budget action movie with resources that has never, ever been allocated for a Black film before. The creative team was all Black. It proves that we can do it. Now, we shouldn't have to prove that we can do it, but we do, and we did, right? Another movie along those lines is A Wrinkle in Time. I have waited 36 years of life to see represented in cinema, particularly big budget cinema, a family that looked anything like mine. And this is a young Black girl with nappy hair, fighting like hell for the life of her white father. Blood. I wept through the whole movie because I had never seen it accepted that that man could bear that child with a Black mother, right? It normalized it, it made it real, yeah? These are not one-off, big-budget Hollywood things either. These things are happening within our community. This year, in about a month, I start rehearsals on a play called Fences at the Grand Theater, right down on Richmond Street. This is you guys know Fences? Y'all seen the movie with Denzel? Like this is a play about a Black family, and it's not about racial segregation, and you don't have a white antagonist, and you don't have, you know, people struggling tooth and nail in the civil rights movement. This is about a family with normal family problems. Some problems specific to the Black community, but all universally understood, right? Across racial lines, whatever. August Wilson, who wrote the play, in fact, intentionally premiered his plays at predominantly white theaters because it gave a vision of Black life that was not the thug, the criminal, the agent of graft, the musician, jazz musician, smoking, shooting up, whatever, right? That's not the paradigm. This is a family drama. These are imperfect people. You can make whatever moral judgment you want on them, but you're not making it on the basis of race. You're enjoying this story because it's a beautiful story, right? So, first of all, I beg all of you to come see it, right? But pursuing stories like this within our own communities is very important too, right? It's not just going out to see the major blockbuster film, it's also coming to your backyard and asserting the fact that a space like the Grand Theater, which is, let's face it, predominantly white theater. I'm on the board, I'm the only Black person on the board. I think I'm the only person of color on the board. The perception, of course, is that that space is not for us, but it is. I can assure you, I wouldn't work there if it wasn't. So, you know, assert your presence. You know, coming into a place like Museum London, we just had representatives of the museum say, we don't have enough Black artifacts in this building, right? And they put out a plaintive plea for more, right? There's this space, just because historically has excluded us for whatever reason, intentionally or not, is actually for us. This community, all of London, is our community. And the only way you can combat the assumptions and the latent racism that exists in this community is by showing up.
So I absolutely love talking about Black Panther and what it has done for the Black community because me being a young Black girl who grew up in Canada, grew up in a place where I would on the TV and not see people who looked like me and have the same religion as me because I'm also Muslim, be represented and knowing exactly what that feels like and knowing exactly what that does to a young mind because we think that our children aren't as smart as they actually are. We think that they don't notice that when they aren't seeing Black females, if they are Black, you know, being the desired characters, or we're seeing Black people being killed the first 2 minutes of the movie and then there's no other Black people in the movie, or when the only time you have a Black girl who's actually desired is in a slavery movie, or it's in a Medea movie, or it's in a movie that is hated by the critics. When you're a Black girl and that's all you see for representation, you start to believe that your skin color, your religion, your culture, things that you grew up with, your name, all those things, they aren't the standard of beauty. And honestly, they aren't. In the society, they aren't. And that's just a fact. That's just the truth. So it's so hard for me to try and explain that and articulate that to my friends who aren't minorities because they're overrepresented in the media, which is great. I love the fact that they're being represented because nobody should know what it feels like to be underrepresented. I'm so glad that they're getting the representation that they do deserve. But because they don't know what it's like to be underrepresented, they don't see what it's like, they don't understand what it must feel like for little Black kids to be able to, on a movie, a big budget movie about superheroes, and yeah, sure, there are other movies like Hancock that have Will Smith, but this is like a big budget movie, you know? Just like he was saying, like this cost billions of dollars, right? Like this was a movie that was crazy. It broke so many records. The fact that we were able to turn on the TV and watch ourselves be the desired character, be the villain if we wanted to, be the protagonist, be, you know, anything that we wanted to be, that means so much. So much. It's done so much for the community. Not even just that movie, but Crazy Rich Asians as well. Like, it's insane.
Thank you so much for what you just shared. So I want to just bring up two important scholars that I think have some little nuggets that we can take with us when we leave today. So the first is Frantz Fanon, who talks about the epidermalization of inferiority. And what you're speaking to in terms of representation is sort of the constant messaging and how we internalize that, and it shapes the way that we value ourselves or we don't value ourselves. And then the other is Patricia Hill Collins, who is a Black feminist, who is an important figure in Black feminist epistemology, and she essentially suggests that Black women offer a unique standpoint, that you have the vantage point that you can understand the experience of the dominant group because you're living in a world that is defined by you, and you understand what it means to be oppressed, and that in order for there to be social progress, we must center the experiences of the oppressed because they have this double vision or this double consciousness. So what I want to say is what your comments are really, in a way, a call to action. So I say to the power holders and the status quo keepers, let us move in the direction of centering the experience of the marginalized. Let us take up the call of Patricia Hill Collins, because those who experience multiple forms of disadvantage have more ways of looking at the problem than if you've got a blind spot. It doesn't devalue the experience of being in a dominant group. It's simply that you can't understand what it means to be oppressed if you've never been oppressed. And it isn't an indictment of any kind. It's merely the suggestion that if we center the experience of a homeless person when we're making policy to address homelessness, that we're going to get the double vision. If we're going to address gender violence, let us invite women who have lived experience to the table. If we want to address racism, let us not only invite Black men, let us also center the lived experience of Black women with multi-faiths in different classes, right? So thank you for what you shared. I think that you've really made that come alive for me, and I hope that we can move in that direction in the future.
I couldn't imagine a better note to end our panel discussion, to be honest. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to our community. And I urge everyone here today to let this be just a spark in the fire of the greater conversation. So yes, this is Black History Month, and it's super great, and we're eating great food, and we're having great conversations. But there are 11 other months that happen like every year. Yeah? So I really encourage you guys to have these conversations. We talked about strategy, and we talked about resilience, and we talked about even humor, and even having those conversations within your families, whether you identify as Black or not. Those are conversations that still should be had at the dinner table with your children, because these are the same children that are going to schools and either perpetuating or facing certain experiences. Yeah? So thank you very much. Let's give our panel a special applause.